Good evening. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the final 2022-2023 Fall and Winter webinar series presented by Newton Conservators. It's really wonderful to have all of you here tonight, and it's terrific that we're going to be hearing from Barbara Bates, naturalist Barbara Bates, who's here to share her knowledge of nature and her sense of fun with us. My name is Beth Wilkinson, and I'll be the moderator of this virtual event. Nissa Patton is our technical director. Newton Conservators is an all-volunteer nonprofit established in 1961, and we work to preserve and to maintain open space in Newton. If you want to learn more about the organization, and those of you who don't, we really hope you will, check out our website at newtonconservators.org. You'll find all sorts of great information there, information about the history of Newton's open spaces, about fighting invasive plants, how to start a pollinator garden. We hope you'll go to check that out. And once you're there, if you're not a member, we hope you will become one. New members get a trail guide as a welcome gift. In tonight's presentation, Barbara will talk about tracks and signs of animals that we can see right here in Newton in our open spaces, and often in our very own backyards. We're really fortunate to have Barbara with us tonight. Welcome, Barbara.
Hi, everybody. Okay, before we get started, I want to just take a moment to honor this Newton land that has given me and so many others so much joy, as well as physical, emotional, and spiritual nourishment, and on which I find so many interesting animal tracks and signs. I know that Newton and the open spaces Newton Conservators promote and steward are located on the historical, current, and unceded territories of Massachusetts. The Massachusetts people's stewardship of this land kept its ecological communities vibrant, strong, and interconnected for thousands of years. And they're still here, stressing the importance of a respectful relationship with the earth, a reciprocal relationship. Newton Conservators hopes to build an authentic relationship with the Massachusetts, and we recognize that there's a lot of work still to be done on that front. So without further ado, we're going to get started. What I'd like to do now is share my screen for our presentation. So here we are with tracks, bones, and other winter finds. I'm going to try to show you the animals that you would normally see in your backyard or in our open spaces. The scene that you see in front of you right now is the Newton Cemetery. And those tracks, we'll be talking about them later, are pretty common in the Newton Cemetery. So we'll be talking about rabbits and squirrels and mouse and vole and shrew, fox, coyote, raccoon, turkey, some of the raptors, songbirds, and white-tailed deer. We'll have to talk about dogs and cats because you'll see those tracks in your yard as well. If I don't run out of time, we'll try to cover bobcat, opossum, beaver, muskrat, and mink. Bobcats are not particularly common in Newton, but beaver, muskrat, and mink can be seen here. So first, just some basic terminology. When we talk about footprints, we're talking about a track, and we're talking about the details in that footprint, the toes, the nails, the palm, and the heel pads of that track. We're concerned with the size. Is it big? Is it small? Is it wide? Is it narrow? And we also consider the patterns. So do they go one after another? Do they make a trail on each side? We're also going to be looking at signs of animals. You don't see the animal, you don't see the track, but you might see a slide or a scrape. You might smell something. You might see scat. Scat is poop. It's poo from an animal. You might see a trash heap. We call those middens. And those are signs of particular animals because they're different for particular animals. You might see browse marks where an animal has chewed off something. And you can tell what kind of an animal it was by the way that the chew mark looks. Right now, you'll smell a lot of fox because it's mating time. And they smell just like skunks. We'll look a little bit at nests and dens and bedding marks. and we'll hear a few sounds that are different than just normal bird calls. But before we get started, you want to get yourself a good field guide. My favorite all-time field guide is this one right here in the middle, the Elbrock one. But it's too big and heavy to carry outside. So the one that I use when I go out in the woods is this one, David Brown's companion guide, and these things called track cards because they're plastic laminates, and they make it really, really easy to put a full-size replica of a print next to a print to see whether or not it's what you're thinking it is. The book on the very bottom, Tracking and the Art of Seeing by Paul Resendez, that's what started this whole thing. And that man is famous for training all of the rest of these people to look very carefully at track and sign. This is what I mean by the track card. In the field, it's really easy to use because it has on one side a nice ruler that's easy to use. It has a full life-size print of the scat and the tracks, and it gives you the pattern that the tracks take. Next, you want to think about your own tracking manners. When you see something, please don't walk on it. Don't walk on top of the tracks because nobody else can see them then. You also want to avoid disturbing the animals that you're tracking, so don't track them in the direction they're going. Backtrack. Help anybody who you're tracking with. If they need your hand in their picture for size, do that. But don't hog the track while you're taking pictures. Let everybody else see them first. Now here's the most important thing about tracking. What you see isn't so much what your eyes are seeing as what your brain is seeing. And if you really care about something, you'll pay attention to it. The reason I have sparrow or eagle in this person's cranium is a very good example of how seeing is in the brain. I attended a Mass Audubon annual birding convention many years ago, and they had the top birders in the nation present, and they were telling stories about birds they had identified. And all of them had a story about a misidentification. One of them talked about a sparrow that everybody was trying to turn into an eagle because they wanted to see an eagle. Another one talked about a cow patty or a meadow muffin that everybody was trying to turn into a nightjar because they wanted to see a nightjar. So you really have to be careful about what you're trying to see, what you want to see, versus what you're actually seeing. So let's look at our own feet. As humans, we have front feet. Those are our hands, and you know what our toes look like. But the top part of our palm is called the palm pad, and the back part of our heel, the heel of our hand, is called the heel pad. Same with our feet. Toes, a palm pad, and heel pads. And our feet are very different looking from hand to foot. So our back foot, our hind foot, looks very different from our front foot. So we have a raccoon here moving on ice in about a half an inch of snow. And you'll notice that the individual imprint here is the track. And it has a certain width. You can see by this ruler, each one of these this is an inch, another inch. These are centimeters on the other side. This is about 2 inches wide, and it's about 3 to 4 inches long, depending whether you're looking at this hind foot or this front foot. You can count the number of toes. Raccoons have 5 toes. And you can see the gait. That's the pattern that it's walking. It walks front foot, hind foot, front foot. And you can see that there's a space between the top of this toe and the top of this toe. That's called the stride. The trail width from here to here is not the same as the body width. It's where the animal's feet land. So here are 3 questions to help you actually see what's there as opposed to hope you see what you want to see. First question you ask yourself is, what do you notice? And here we're asking you not to name anything, but simply to say, well, I see a streak, or I see a round blob, or I see a deep mark or a shallow mark, or I see many marks or a few marks, or I see a color or something like that. And then the next thing we ask you to consider is, where are you? Are you in a forest? Are you in a desert? Are you in a busy street? What's the context? And then you start to question yourself. What do you wonder about? What do you want to explore? So let's practice that. I'm going to ask Nissa to open the chat. And you're seeing a scene in Webster Woods. So right away, you know you're in a forest. But what do you notice? And just type it right into the chat. I'm hoping Nissa has their footprints. Okay, you're assuming they're footprints, right? So you see some shapes down here. Paw prints on the lower log. Snow on the logs with small footprints. Okay, that's pretty good. So on this bottom log, people are seeing shapes. What do you notice about the shapes? Somebody's saying 2 tracks at the bottom. Marks in the snow of snowfall, tracks in the lower log. Where is it going? No tracks on the leaves. Snow on the log, good. Elongated, longish, if they're toes. Okay, 5 toes on the print. Okay, so somebody is counting toes. Good for you, you're noticing something. But it's hard to see anything in these leaves, isn't it? Does anybody notice anything up here? Way up at the top, there are a few footprints. You have to get really close to the screen to see them, but they're there. And what do you wonder about this? Does anybody have some questions that they'd like to ask about this? Maybe they're hypothesizing that the animal is a small size since it didn't jump over the log. Maybe. Where did it come from? Excellent question. Where is it coming from? What kind of animal? Why are the paw prints on the log? An excellent, excellent question. Somebody is saying, I think they're coming from the top of the log and walking down it. Okay, we're going to close the chat for a moment. And what you're looking at is a raccoon that started way up here at the top. And because the snow was only covering one side of the log, and he doesn't like to get his feet cold, he was walking all the way down the log on the unsnowed part, jumped over to this log to come down, and left 2 hind foots and 2 front feet. So the animal was coming this way down the log and jumping down. It is the 5 toes, it is the raccoon footprint. But the reason the raccoon is on top of the log is that the animals in the forest generally, bobcats do this, many animals do this, coyotes don't, but many animals do. They will walk along the logs because it's easier. It's free of bushes, it's usually drier, and animals are always doing anything they can to reduce the amount of effort they have to do. So the other thing you want to think about when you're looking at something is the animal's behavior. Does it fly or walk? And when you look at these little marks on the snow, you see lots of them, right? So do you think that this is a solitary animal, or is this a group of animals? This is a forest, so a group of animals that might live in the forest. And because there are these small birch seeds all over where these tracks are wandering around, you might say, it's eating, and it's after the birch seeds. These are small songbird tracks. A whole flock of them have landed because birch seeds are so light they sit on the top of the snow and make it easy for the animal to eat. So we're going to open the chat again, and I'm going to ask you, what do you notice about this? This is mid-February. There's about 1.5 feet of snow on the ground. This is the cemetery, the Newton Cemetery. It's in Newton Highlands. And I'm on the road, one of the tracks, one of the roads that they clear, and I'm seeing this picture. So what do you notice? Deep tracks? Question mark, jumping. Several animals sliding in the snow. Some large animal leaping maybe over the snow. A series of sightings, an appendage on either side. Wings or an appendage on either side. Several long interruptions, perfect, this is what we want to see. Several long interruptions at one end and deeper there. Excellent observation. Something sliding perhaps. Long patterns, maybe deer leaping? Somebody, so you're naming too fast, you're going too fast. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. This is a little bit further along the road, and I'm looking at these markings from a slightly different angle. What do you notice now? And this is why it's important not to name an animal too soon, because it's clearly not a deer. Striations, excellent. What else do you notice? Dragging or sliding, maybe. Dragging something. A hand. I think somebody may be thinking that this is a hand, and somebody else is saying maybe this is a tail. There seems to be a sliding and then footprints. Ooh, are these footprints? Wing marks, maybe. Pulling a prey. Interesting question to ask. Okay, we're going to stop that. I'm going to go a little bit further up the road. And I see this series. These are the pictures that I just showed you back here. And now I see these going from the road up to that area. So what do you see? What do you notice? Are there many animals, a few animals, one animal? Are they deep? Are they shallow? Somebody's saying at least 4 animals. Okay, maybe 4. 4 tracks. Yep, there we go. Heavy animals, because they're sinking in the snow. Good work. Okay, they're moving together. Excellent. Okay, we're going to stop that. This is a close-up of those imprints. What do you notice now? What's the shape? We know they're heavy because they're sinking, right? An animal uses poles. I love it. Poles with baskets, maybe. Animal moving in the same direction, true. Hoof prints? Go for the sun. What is the shape? They're deep marks, excellent. Deep marks, short gait, excellent. Thin limbs, interesting, okay. Possibly. And what is the shape? What is the shape? Not what is making the shape, but what is the shape? Round holes, possibly round. How about square holes? Anybody see a square hole? Or a triangular hole? Okay, we're going to stop. And I'm going to show you a bit of a diamond. Excellent. Okay. Ah, is it trotting? This is what you're seeing. These are Canada geese. Canada geese that are landing by dragging their tail, back finning with their wings, plopping with their body. This is the body plop. This is a piece of scat where the animal pooped out a little bit. Taking a few steps and saying, this stinks, I'm flying out of here. But if you guessed hoof prints or poles or something like that, you'd be missing the animal. So here's the Canada goose in shallow snow, and you can see the 3 toes and the webbing, but you can see it's also sort of a squarish shape. And in deep snow, it does look kind of squarish. And you can see the drag marks, because it's deep snow, that you don't see, except very lightly, a toe drag here. The drag marks is before it steps in the next piece of snow. So substrate matters quite a lot in terms of getting a clear print. The next thing you're going to look for is the basic gait pattern, whether it's a diagonal walk, which can sometimes look like a straight pogo line, whether it's a pace, and the pace is this sort of lumbering walk that a raccoon, beaver, skunk, porcupine, the muskrat, the wide-bodied animals use, bears do that as well. A bound, these are your weasels, your fisher is a weasel, that are leaping, And the small print is the front foot, and the big print is the back foot. But you'll notice the rabbits and the squirrels land with their front feet and overshoot with their back feet. And you'll notice that for dogs, cats, and deer, and coyote and fox, they step somewhat in their own tracks. Now, cats, foxes, and coyotes will step in their own tracks, making that sort of pogo look. This is a direct register of a house cat. You'll see the print here where they stepped exactly in the print, and here where they're just slightly offset, but here where they're very close. Now, why would an animal step in its own print? Because it's easier, it uses less energy. Here's a coyote with a direct register. The stride would be toe to toe, it's about 22 inches for a coyote. And here's a raccoon, slightly angular, with the width of the trail and the hind foot and the front foot taking a different pattern. You'll notice for dogs that you can see the claws because they're not retractable, and for cats, you cannot. There's another thing. When you see a dog print or a cat print in the snow, you'll always see this distinction. Cats have their four toes with a almost U-shaped pad here. Dogs, and this is a small dog, have a perfect X through their prints, and you can see toenails, at least at the top, usually on each side as well. Now, a large dog will have a messier footprint, but let's go to our small rodents, and we'll see what they look like. And the thing to keep in mind here is that bunnies, ending in Y, will always have this Y-shaped print. The two back feet land in front of the two front feet. So front foot, front foot, bam, both back feet, and then it leaps off again. Squirrels have this sort of trapezoidal square print. It bounds to the two front feet, and the back feet land in front of it and takes off again. What this looks like is the squirrel lands, the back feet overshoot, and the front, it goes off again. If it's a squirrel, it's this kind. If it's a land dweller like a rabbit or a hare, you get that Y shape. But if it's a weasel, the animal leaps, lands on the front feet. The back feet do not overshoot the front feet. They land right behind the front feet, right here, and then the animal takes off again. This is your eastern cottontail, and the animal will hang around shrubs like this yew bush here. Many rabbits will hang around there because it's good cover for them as they're foraging for things to eat. In the summer, of course, they're eating clover and grass and your houseplants and everything else they can get their little teeth on, your lawn and whatever they can get. In the winter, they're eating twigs. But you see that distinctive two back feet that have landed in front of the two front feet. This pen is about 5.5 inches long. So here you see how furry the back feet are, and that's why it's so hard to see really distinct toes. You can see somewhat distinct toes here because this is very light snow on a black surface, but it's really hard to tell the toes on these. You can also see that it's a leap. A normal leap is usually 5 inches to 32 inches for a little cottontail. A little cottontail is a small animal. If you're expecting to see 6 and 7 foot jumps, it's not an eastern cottontail. You're talking now about a snowshoe hare, and we do have them up north of the city, but not in Newton. The other sign that you'll see for eastern cottontails is browse that they do. They can scrape bark off of trees because they're eating that bark up to 22 inches. I actually measured it. This is 22 inches. That little rabbit can stick up on its hind legs, hold on to this, and start chewing the bark off of your tree. It can also nip the bark, and when it nips, it does an absolutely 45-degree angle, clean as a garden shear. This is my holly tree after this rabbit had eaten quite a lot of it, as you can see, and defecated all over the area and urinated all over the area. The red is fairly common. It's not a disease. It's a protein in the urine. And this is the scat, perfectly round. Now, Eastern cottontails eat their scat. It's called coprophagy. Coprophagy. And when an animal is coprophagic, it's usually an animal that's eating bark like this, the cambium under the bark. Beavers do this. And they have to eat their scat because that's the only way they can get the total nutrients out of the browse that they're eating. Now, the way that the rabbit is able to make those very sharp cuts is because it has these two peg teeth right here behind its front incisors. And the peg teeth, as is shown here, meet the bottom incisors. And that gives it, you can see the peg teeth right here in the skull, that gives it a very sharp, clean cut. Deer, on the other hand, this is a deer skull, white-tailed deer skull, have no front teeth at all on their top palate. They only have bottom teeth. So when a deer is browsing on your yews or your trees, the deer will grab it and twist its head and pull it off, and you'll get a very ragged tear. You won't get that sheer tear. If you're looking for a rabbit nest, an eastern cottontail nest, they are very casual about their nests. It may just be a scrape in your lawn, or like this one, this rabbit actually pulled the begonias out of my neighbor's planter, took all this cut grass and put it there. I have taken it out here, put all the cut grass that it took up there, and it was going to have its babies right there in the planter. Pretty casual mama. Squirrel tracks look very different. You can see toenails, you can see the toes, you can see the palm pads and the heel pads of these. In fact, now that I'm looking at this central picture, this may actually be a red squirrel, so don't look at that one. Look at these two. This is a gray squirrel. You can see that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, almost 5.5 to 6 inches wide, and that's about right. A red squirrel would be much smaller. And you can see the toes that show up. You can see it can bound quite a distance. You can also see squirrel signs in terms of drays. Drays are their squirrel nests up in trees. This is a maple tree right behind the Newton Free Library. It's up there. If you take a quick look at it, you can see it's just all sorts of dried leaves and shreds of bark. Sometimes there is moss in them, but these things are incredibly good insulators, so they're great warming huts. Now, why do they do drays? It's because they've run out of holes. They prefer holes. This is a squirrel nest at Belmont's habitat sanctuary, where we had a couple of nesting squirrels. And they prefer those holes, but cities do such a good job of patching up holes or cutting down trees with holes in them that they're pretty much forced into using the drays. The other sign that you're going to see for squirrels and for chipmunks and any other rodent are middens, and middens are full of the shells of nuts. The thing that will tell you that it's a gray squirrel is a very crudely stripped pine cone or spruce cone and a very wide open nut. If it's a small hole, then you're more likely talking about a chipmunk or maybe a red squirrel. The middens of a gray squirrel look like this. This is a black walnut. They've just husked it and they've left it all over the place and carried off the nut. Ferns to be on so they can watch whoever is trying to sneak up on them while they're eating. This is a gray squirrel midden. This is the remains of an acorn. He's just demolished the acorn to get to the meat inside. This is a little piece of scat we'll talk about later. And this is a rock. This was a granite bench at the cemetery. This is a rock in my backyard that shows you how the squirrel has attacked all the acorns. You can see by this index fingernail how small the gray squirrel scat is. You can also see that it's oblong. It's not round like the eastern cottontail scat. It's not a perfect globe. The red squirrel, much smaller animal, much noisier. If you're getting scolded, it's probably one of these red squirrels. This is what they sound like. when they're angry at you, they will make a real racket, and they will take over, like the gray squirrels, they'll take over your birdhouses. This is a red squirrel. He's moving from the top of the screen to the bottom, and you can see very clearly the fur on the heel pad, and you can see the palm pads, the toes, and the nails. The back feet, and the front feet, and then the back feet landing here. You can see the heel pads, the palm pads, and the toes. It's very rare to get a print as nice and clear as that, so when you find one, get a picture. Again, you're seeing the very furred heel on the red squirrel and the toenails. This is a tree in the Newton Cemetery right here, and you can see by the scraps below it that the squirrel's been up on a branch feeding, which is typical of red squirrels. And then it's been coming down and going to see its cache. It has, red squirrels, unlike gray squirrels, will bury their nuts. Red squirrels stash them in a cache. And this one had them stashed under the snow, and he or she had to dig down to get that cache. You can see the cache is about the size, width of the body of the squirrel. It's narrow. What squirrels also do, this is typical squirrel style, go up and ends off of branches, just the very tips with the leaves still on them. We don't know authoritatively why they do this, but you'll see just tons of branches down like this, just the little tips. They may be sipping the sap, they may be eating the buds, we really don't know. Now here's a stumper. What the devil is this? Is this a tractor? When I saw this, I didn't know quite what it was. I thought it must be a squirrel, because you see how it arcs into a tree. It's coming from the road, going across the snow and up to a tree. So I'm thinking a squirrel. So I started measuring it. The width would suggest a gray squirrel, because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wide, and you see the plops for all 4 feet, and then the drag of the animal's body through this deep snow. But I can't know for sure, but that's my hypothesis. So let's move on to mice. Mice are rodents. I've got a dead mouse here, so you can see the small size of their feet and the length of their tail. The white-footed mouse, or deer mouse, is common to houses, but also to Cold Spring Park. And this picture was taken in Cold Spring Park. And you can see the mouse's tail drag here, going all the way through up to here and under the log. But you can also see the paired feet. This is a bound. Same, you got the long tail and you got both feet landing together, so it's a plop as this mouse moves from my granite front steps into my house, where he knows he's got acorns. And this is what a mouse-nibbled acorn looks like. You remember what that gray squirrel did? It just tore the acorn shell apart. A mouse doesn't spend any more time or effort than it has to. Nice enough hole for it to get its little nose in there and eat the meat. A vole, very small animal, common prey to all of our raptors and to foxes and to coyotes, as well as bobcats, has a very shambly, because it's got a wide body, has a very shambly trail. And it almost looks sort of pigeon-toed. Very small feet, as you can see. It's coming into and out of my sump pump drain in my backyard. But the other thing you'll notice about voles and shrews as well are their tunnels when the snow starts to melt, because voles stay under the snow. They rarely walk on top of it unless it's light snow, like the snow I was just showing you. So if you got 5 or 6 inches of snow, they're under the snow tunneling. And when the snow starts to melt, their tunnels are revealed. So this was taken in one of the cemeteries, and you can see where it's melted around a gravestone, and all the tunnels that come out for these voles. This is a fresh tunnel. I think it's a shrew tunnel because it's not as wide as a vole tunnel. This was at Cold Spring Park. And you can see, again, it's coming out of the U where the shelter is, going under the snow. We have a breathing hole here where the animal comes up to get a breath, and then it continues on. I have no idea how these animals manage to know the direction that they're going in. Now, the thing that eats these voles and shrews are foxes. Foxes, coyotes, hawks, owls, things like that. But fox footprints are hard to see because foxes have very furry feet. I've used a very high intensity light to shine across this mud print here so you can pick up the fur. And you see how there's just a mound of fur in the front. This is the heel pad, and these are the 4 toes. This is what I saw, and you can barely see the imprint, the heel pad, and the 4 toes. Foxes also make signs that are sounds and scents. This is a wonderful picture by Mary Holland's daughter, I believe, of a red fox. And what is happening now in late January, but mostly in February, is the mating of a fox. And when foxes are mating, their urine smells like skunks, and their scent smells like skunks. So if you're walking through, for instance, the cemetery, and you suddenly smell a skunk, it's probably a fox. There's another thing about a fox. It makes a screaming call. That's called a vixen's scream. And it can carry up to a mile, and it's made to attract a mate. But unfortunately, most people report it to the police as somebody being murdered in the woods. And the police are very familiar with getting these calls in the January-February timeframe. Now, also, you may be lucky enough to see a coyote print in your backyard. This is a coyote print in fairly soft mud that's fairly deep. So unusually, you're seeing one toenail beside the 2 at the front. But typically, you'd see these 2 in the front, the 4 and the pad, always in this egg shape. It never spreads out. Now, a very small dog, and this coyote print is you can see, a little bit more than 2 inches wide and a little bit more than 2.5 inches long, 3 almost if you count to the toenails. A small dog would have this print, but it would be like this. It'd be that sort of a size. This is what that coyote print looks like in the snow. Again, you see the toes might spread a little bit, but not much. You've still got that X, and you've got the 2 distinctive toenails right there. If you've got really crusty snow, you'll see the toenails break through. You'll see the paw spread a little bit, and that is what you'll get. And the only way you can tell that's a coyote is to look at the rest of the tracks, measure the stride, because this animal, again, is stepping in its own tracks. This is about 22 inches here. And you make an educated guess. Now, to compare that with a dog print, this is a golden retriever. They've got a really messy foot. Their toes are really spread out. And even German Shepherds have toes that are spread out, and you can see all of the toenails. You might think that a Rhodesian Ridgeback has a tighter foot. Look at how spread out their toes are. So let's look at coyote winter and summer scat. Coyote scat reflects what the coyote eats. In this summer, the coyote was eating berries as well as rabbits, so you've got some rabbit fur in here. And this particular coyote had been eating old apples. Hadn't been able to find any rabbits, I guess, and had been eating old apples, so it looks pretty homogeneous. Weathered coyote scat shows you the twisting that you're used to seeing and the little tufts at the end that is more typical of coyote scat. This coyote must have been starving because the scat is almost entirely made up of deer hair, and that poor animal must have been chewing on weathered hide from something else being killed. Dog scat is very different. Now, I can't say authoritatively that this is dog scat, but it's in somebody's backyard garden. And you can see how weathered it is, but you can also see how homogeneous it is. It's not got that corkscrew look. It's got pellet look. That's typical of dog. And homogeneity of it, it's dog food. That's what dogs eat. And you say, well, we have a leash law, right? There aren't any dogs in the area. Well, you'd be surprised how many dogs are wandering around. So let's take a look at some of the birds that we have. It's pretty easy to see wild turkey tracks. They've got the 3 front toes, the heel pad, and the back toe. And the whole print is between 5.5 and 6 inches long, and they have a very distinctive toe drag. But there's another sign of wild turkeys. It's where they roost continuously. You'll see their droppings here, and you'll see feathers because they molt 1 feather at a time. And when they're roosting, they're often preening their feathers, and so you'll find feathers under their roosts. And that means go back there and see whether you can watch the turkeys at dusk fly up to their roosts. That's a real treat. But songbird tracks are tiny. These tracks are smaller than my thumbnail. You'll see the track right here. This was taken in Webster Woods. You'll see one track here that started to hop this way. You'll see another track here that's nice and clear, the 3 toes and the back toe. And here you see the imprint of the wing. It lands, hops around a little bit to get after these seeds, and then departs. Pileated woodpeckers are present in Newton. The video that I'm going to show you was not taken in Newton, but I've seen a bird like this in Webster Woods, and people have told me they've seen them in Cold Spring Park. But to give you a sense of the size of hole that they make, it's huge. And this is the sound of one drumming. It's a deep, definitely loud sound. It's a very loud sound. What it looks like is this. Now, I'm sorry for the jet that you're hearing, but you can hear him bash his head in there a couple of times. You'll watch this bird continue to peck. What the bird is after in winter is carpenter ants. And now what he's doing is, when you see him cock his head like that and spend some time, his tongue is whipping out and going down and getting those carpenter ants. And he's eating. How do I know that? Because I've seen woodpecker scat. This is a pileated woodpecker poop scat. This is a penny right here, so you can see it's very small. But these are all tiny ant exoskeletons. Unlike our raptors that have cough pellets, pileateds actually do eliminate their scat through their cloaca, and so you see the exoskeletons there. Owls, on the other hand, have cough pellets. This is a fabulous series that Rick Olick took at Habitat, showing this owl hawking up this big pellet as it comes out. And this is a great horned owl, so that pellet is about 3 inches long. A fresh pellet looks like this. You can see the bones in it, the bones and the hair of the animal that's been digested. It's hard to see on the ground. You have to look for it. Look at the bottom of trees that you've seen owls roosting in, and you might be lucky enough to find one, or you might be lucky enough to find one that's weathered like this. You'll see a large rabbit bone here. You can see how large the rabbit bones are. And then the weathered white bones, and again, fur of the animal that's been compressed. If you're lucky, and I got this print in the Newton Cemetery, you might even see an owl strike. There's a yew bush here, and the rabbit came out here, was grabbed before it could finish to jump by, this is the wings settling down and the owl taking off. Could have been a hawk, I suppose. Now this is feeding sign. You're seeing a lot of plucked hair or fur, and if you look very closely in this red circle, you'll notice that there's a gray undercoat and a ticked outer coat. That ticked outer coat is sort of a fawn tan color and black. This is a red-tailed hawk dismembering a rabbit in Newton Center, right at the intersection of Center Street and Parker Street. Cypress and Parker Street. And here's your rabbit with its ticked furs and its white belly, and that's where the white fur is coming from, and the hawk is tearing it apart. Now, here's another kill site. This is a yellow-shafted flicker, an eastern flicker. It's a ground-feeding bird, so animals can get it on the ground as well as on the wing. But the way that you tell whether it was a bird, a raptor that ate this bird, or a fox or a coyote, is to look at the end of the feathers. You can see that this feather has been chewed on. It hasn't been pulled. A bird will pull the feathers. A coyote or a fox will chew them off. So let's look at raccoons. Look at those wonderful long fingernails and fingers. on both the hind and the front feet. This raccoon is fishing in my bird bath in my front yard. And what it's doing is not washing its hands. What it's doing is feeling in the mud. There wasn't any mud here, but it's trying anyway. It's feeling in the mud for things like shellfish and crayfish, which they love to eat. And this is the most perfect set of raccoon prints I've ever seen. It was taken by Rick Olick on a bike path where it just bare skim of snow, so you can actually count each of the fingers. They're wide open. You can see the hind print and the front print, the entire heel pad and palm pad. So it's quite a great print. It's harder on cracked mud. You can barely count the toes. That's good. So you see it's barely an imprint. On snow that's deeper, it's a little bit easier, as long as there's something firm underneath. On old mud, again, very hard to see, but you can see the distinct toes and you can measure the stride. This mud here is again in the Newton Cemetery right by the stream, and you can actually count the fingers, back feet and front feet. Beautiful hind foot print. And often you will find scat by the ponds in Newton Cemetery where they've eaten crayfish, and you find little tiny pieces of crayfish shell. These are those raccoon tracks that I was showing you very early on, and you see they're perfect. But here's the thing about raccoons. When they get cold, they retract their toes. They make them smaller. So I learned from David Brown that he calls the raccoon the great fooler, because this was a case of me trying to turn this raccoon's footprints into a fisher leaping up this monument step in the Newton Cemetery. You'll notice the bottom print, that's a perfect print that looks exactly like a fisher. It's got the 5 toes, it's got the same size and shape. You can see them here too. But what's happened is the raccoon has withdrawn its toes, bunched them up because it's cold, and it's not a fisher. I was trying to make this raccoon into a fisher as well, and I had to analyze it quite a long time. You don't see a drag from a raccoon, from a fisher. It would just be bounding, and these lines for the feet would be in the same direction for a fisher, but not for a raccoon. A raccoon has a narrower body, and this is a 4.5 inch wide path. A fisher is in the range, but probably larger. And a fisher's stride or lope will be much longer. And this was a 12-inch stride here. So it was a very big raccoon with cold toes that was walking here. Raccoons are also pretty messy in their scat. And the reason I've got a nose with a line through it here is you never want to smell raccoon scat. Most of the time it is a formed scat. It's not a puddle like this. This was my neighbor's deck. 3 raccoons, a mother and her 2 babies, decided they were going to start using it as a latrine. And raccoons will revisit the site where they have been defecating over and over again. And they had a devil's own time discouraging the raccoons from pooping on their back deck. The reason you don't want to smell it is they have all sorts of ringworms and other kinds of parasites that you can inadvertently breathe in, and you just don't want those. So what do white-tailed deer tracks look like? Very distinctive. If the deer is walking slowly, the 2 toes are very close together. If the deer is moving quickly, those toes spread, as it is in the bottom one here. You're seeing about a 2-inch wide, 2.5 inch long oblong, and about a 21 to 22 inch stride. This is a case where the deer was defecating. This is winter scat, and also walking because he's eating the yew bushes that are right beyond the picture here. So you can say to yourself, okay, I'm seeing an animal with that kind of diagonal walk, walking across this pond in the Newton Cemetery. Is it a deer or a coyote? It's deep snow. We have those paired drag lines, about a 6+ inch wide path, and about a 22-inch stride. And that's pretty typical of both animals, but a coyote won't drag its feet. a deer will. So this is probably a deer path. And here's a deer foraging. Deer don't really lie down, but they will dig in the snow to get acorns that they can eat or beech mast that's fallen down. And here they are walking up through a neighbor's yard, just happy and as they can be eating their landscaping. But again, anything that a deer has been browsing on is going to have those ragged edges. Depending on when you see deer's scat, it will look different. In the winter, when most of what they're eating is dried or evergreen material, you get these very individual scat pellets. Again, they're oblong. They're not round like a rabbit. The rabbit will be particularly a complete globe. And here you've got this oblong scat. In the summer, and this is a penny, by the way, in the summer, they're eating a lot of wetter material, grasses, leaves that they're pulling off of trees, things like that. And so their scat will clump in a larger clump. The other mark that you'll see is deer scent marking. This is a very thin staghorn sumac. It's about maybe an inch and a half wide. So we know this was a very small buck that was rubbing its antlers on this. Larger bucks use larger diameter trees. And they are rubbing not to get the velvet off of their antlers, but to deposit the scent. They're about to go into rut. That's when the deer mate in the autumn. They're about to go into rut, and they're trying to mark their scent on this tree. And they rub that gland on there. It's the base of their antlers, and it gets the scent on their antlers, it gets the scent on the tree, and they can carry the scent off with them, and they leave the scent on the tree to mark that they're looking for love. So let's see, we've got about 5 more minutes. Beth, you tell me, shall we go on for a little bit, or shall we stop and ask questions?
Let's go on.
Okie doke. She's making it. So, whoops, here's a bobcat track. Again, the animal is walking on a log, classic bobcat. And it will be, if it's in mud, not showing, here you've got the coyote with the 2 toenails, you will see no toenails at all on bobcat. But the interesting thing about this path is that you're seeing both bobcats and coyotes on it. We also saw all sorts of things on it. This is the one shot that wasn't taken in Newton. This was taken out by the Quabbin area. And this shot, just a little bit further down, had raccoon, it had bear, it had everything. It's a fire road. And again, animals will take the easy way. They'll take the way with the least effort, so they're walking on the fire road. This is a very distinctive bobcat sign. It's a scrape right here where you're seeing the snow. Scat right at the end of it. Let's go back. Take a look at that scat. You'll see the sort of the fur that's in the scat and a ball and sort of look in the scat. But what the bobcat does when it marks its territory is scrape, scrape, and then poop. That's what it does to mark its territory. Now, the thing that you'll notice here is that this bobcat has 6 toes. No, it only has 4, but its hind foot has stepped on top of its front foot, so that you have the hind foot's extra toes showing in the print. I don't have an opossum print, but I do have an opossum body that I can show you. That's one down here. This was, I think, hit by a snow truck, and I found it in the side of the road. This is at the side of my driveway, a dead possum. This is what a live possum looks like. They have very, very human-like hands, feet and hands, very distinctive hands and feet, and a long tail that is very little hair on it. So possums have been increasing their range, and when they get up here to Newton, they, if we have a severe winter, suffer frostbite on their ears and their tails. So if you see a possum, you're likely to see a possum with a damaged tail and damaged ears. You'll also see in Newton, along the Charles River, signs of beaver. Now, a beaver is a big animal. We're talking something golden retriever size, up to 40, 60 pounds of animal, and you can see the size of its head and its teeth. That's what fells these trees. But the reason you don't see their tracks is because their broad tail, the broad flattened tail, they drag over the tracks, and that totally messes up the tracks. But you can see their lodges. This is a lodge that is at Kendrick Pond in Cutler Woods that's no longer used because the pond has gotten so low that the animal can't get any safety from the lodge. But this will give you a sense of what beaver sign looks like and the size of the chips they take out with those big teeth. We're talking a 3-inch long, 4-inch long chip, and here they're eating the bark after they've cut down the tree. Muskrats, on the other hand, are tiny. Here's a muskrat on Route 9 in a water feature on somebody's garden. This thing is a little bit smaller than a football, and it's got a long, vertically flattened tail, so that when it walks, you get the tail drag, as is shown here on the track card. Its scat, unlike beaver scat, which is normally defecated in the water, its scat is very small. Sometimes you'll see it along the Charles River. Mink you will see by streams and by the Charles River. They're fishing animals. They have small tracks, 1.5 foot wide, and those 5 fingers. Mink, weasels, fisher are mustelids. So you'll see these 5 fingers or toes and the small heel pads. So there we have it. Let's see if we've got any questions.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Barbara. That was amazing. And it was wonderful to see your thought process during some of it. We have questions. I'm going to ask you a process question to begin with before we go to some that we have. And what is your hierarchy when you're looking at these prints, when you start to analyze them? Because you're really experienced. So what do you recommend for us? Do we start with the shape? Do we start with the size? Do we start with the pattern? Do we observe it all and then try to figure it out? I mean, when we're not as experienced as you are, how do we proceed?
Well, first of all, I need to say I'm not an expert, okay? I've been doing this as an amateur for about 6-7 years now, and I've taken a number of classes. But I look at the whole thing, and then I try to just stick with what do I notice? Shape, toes, pattern, then what's around. Then I start to measure. And then I'll drag out my track card and lay it down and say, does it look like this? So that's sort of what I do. For a track that I know well, like deer, I don't have to do that. We don't have moose, except very, very occasionally here. And moose footprints are like the size of a horse next to the deer, a little tiny deer. So I don't need to do that. But I don't think there's a strict hierarchy. But you do want to cover all the bases.
Okay, so we've got our track cards. We found this track. It's a track we don't know. Are the track cards organized so that we go by size? Are they organized so we go by shape?
Well, they are organized by size. That's kind of why I like them, because you can just leaf through find something similar size and sort of narrow it down. But they're not organized by shape.
Okay, so size is sort of our starting point. I mean, we notice everything, as you taught us. We notice and then we start to narrow down. But in our narrowing process, we go to size first.
But you have to know something about size. Now, if you don't know size and you don't have track cards and all you've got is Peterson's guide, then you're going to have to do a little bit more noticing than the size. You'll have to look at shape and where it is and whether it's got a certain kind of pattern. And you'll have to look, is this dog-like or cat-like? Or is this a bounding pattern like a squirrel or a rabbit or a mustelid like a weasel or a fisher or is it a raccoon? What are we talking about?
Okay, and so we should bring our little ruler with us, or no, our hands are approximately.
Absolutely. Bring a ruler, because then if you want to take a picture, you can lay your ruler down, or a tape measure. And also bring a light, a really high intensity pen light, so that if this is your track You can, well, if this is the track, you can shine the light across the track to create contrast, shadow, so that you can take a picture of it.
Okay. Deborah's asking us, how do we get the track cards?
You can order them online when we send out our Beth, my dear friend Beth, normally sends out these wonderful after webinar emails, and I will put a website where you can get the track cards.
Okay. And maybe the slide that shows the books you use too. I'll grab that.
Yes, we can do that.
That would be great. So Deborah says that she's seen what she thinks is a groundhog in the neighbor's vegetable garden, about the size of a large cat or a small beaver, no tail, big furry ball. Groundhog or other?
What time of year did she see it? If it's summer, it's most likely a groundhog. If it's winter, they're hibernating. Now, it's been a warm winter, but I suspect they're still hibernating. So I would suspect if she's seeing it now, she's not seeing a groundhog, and I'm not sure what she's seeing.
She said it was in the summer and it was eating the veggies.
That's a groundhog and getting very fat.
Okay. We have a question from Alan who says, what would make a sheer tear that is flat and not 45 degrees?
A rabbit that's got his bite off.
That's funny. So you talked about red squirrels versus gray squirrels. What's the frequency in Newton of reds versus gray?
I don't know authoritatively, but my experience is I've seen a lot more gray squirrels than I have red.
I had red a few years ago and they disappeared and I haven't seen them. So I just didn't know whether they just didn't like my yard.
Well, I thought they didn't like my yard, and I found out that they're in my neighbor's yard because I was over there having dinner in the summer, and there was this terrible racket. And we saw the red squirrel. It torments the dog. They have a black dog that goes out in the yard, and the red squirrel will come halfway down the tree and torment the dog, scold it, and make a real ruckus, and the dog will go nuts. And then the squirrel will go back up the tree.
It's funny.
They're little brats.
So how do you tell the difference between a chipmunk and a red squirrel? Do they have very different looking prints?
Chipmunks, they do have a slightly different print. I don't have prints I can show you. So, and a very large chipmunk would be a very small red squirrel. So chipmunks are usually much smaller than red squirrels. Okay. That's a good question. I would have to do some research.
Okay.
You'd have to do a lot of measuring on that, and you'd have to look at the gestalt, as the whole pattern of the tracks. For instance, I can see chipmunk tracks coming out of drain pipes because they'll go up the gutters, the drain pipes for your gutters, to get out of the way of something that's chasing them. You can see those patterns going up and down. But a red squirrel would not do that, I don't think. They'd go straight to a tree.
So it's location that helps us.
Location would probably help you. If it's by a rock wall and you see it disappearing into a rock wall, that's probably a chipmunk because they love rock walls.
Okay, I got a question. Yews, besides being non-native, I thought they were poisonous, but you've told us about all these creatures eating yews. How? Why? Do they die?
They don't die. Deer will eat your arborvitae and your yews. Chipmunks will eat the buds off of yews. I don't know. I don't know the answer to why their stomachs can handle things that ours can't. I know that bear, when they come out of hibernation, will eat skunk cabbage, which is so full of oxalic acid that it would poison a human being. But for some reason, the bear can tolerate it.
But I've seen articles about bears being killed by eating yews. So it must be that some non-human animals can't tolerate it and some can.
You got me. I don't know the answer to that.
I'm sorry. You've got my mind just reeling. Thank you. Let's go to someone else's mind reeling. And please, if you have questions, put them in. Bobby says, I saw a lot of squirrel nips this year, never having noticed them before this. So I worried the trees were sick. Then I was told they were from squirrels. Is it possible that the squirrels don't do this every year?
I think anything is possible. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know that it's a seasonal thing or uh, I don't know the answer to that. Uh, they do it when they do it. I've never interviewed a squirrel, sorry.
Oh, you get all these picky questions, but we're
They're
having
good
fun.
questions. They're good questions, and it takes a lot of careful logging of experience to get the answer to those sorts of questions. You've got to get a sense of the number of animals in an area, the frequency of this kind of nipping. There's a lot of things you'd have to track, and I don't do that careful logging.
Now, it was amazing to hear the pileated woodpecker drumming, and I've seen them in Webster Woods. I haven't seen them in other places in Newton, but I do have red bellies in my yard. How do I tell the difference if I can't see it between a red belly and a pileated?
You'd have to ask a more experienced birder than I. The drumming will sound deeper and stronger from a pileated. It's really loud compared to a red-bellied, because your pileated is almost a chicken-sized bird. It's huge. It's ginormous.
Yeah.
And then you'd have to get a bird call book, not a book, but a record or something to listen to the sounds. Cornell does sell its Sounds of Bird library for, I think it's less than $25. And that's where I get my drumming sounds and my bird sounds when I play them.
Oh, neat. So we can go listen and try to figure it out and invite you over to help us. Okay. Andy says that it seems to her there were also more nips this year. And she wonders whether maybe it's drought related or maybe it was an observational error.
I think that's an excellent hypothesis because this year was a record drought and there wasn't a lot of places for the animals to get water other than the sap in trees.
It's great. And Carol asks us, do chipmunks hibernate?
Chipmunks are what we call nappers. They have very elaborate burrow systems with a sleeping chamber, a storage chamber, a trash chamber, all this sort of thing. And they'll wake up and eat their food down and then go back to sleep. And if it's a particularly warm day, they might pop out and then pop back in. They're not true hibernators the way groundhogs are.
Actually, I've got to ask you the question I asked you before this started, before we were talking on our own, but I want to share it with everyone, your answer with everyone else. Where in Newton might you possibly see a bobcat?
Oh, you have to go far west and to the very edges, like Weston. Bobcats are typically seen in the Berkshires or in Quabbin, so you're talking way far west. But they're starting to come in. People have caught them on track cams in Wellesley, in Needham, and in Weston.
It'd be neat. We've got to get some track cams out there.
Yeah, and what you want to watch for a bobcat is bobcats really specialize in rabbits. So if you know where there are rabbit runs, put your trail cam there. The ones that are coming in closer to the city may be starting to specialize in squirrels because there are a lot more squirrels, although looking in my yard, you'd see an awful lot more rabbits too.
I'm going to ask one last question because it's getting late here. You gave us lots of wonderful photos from the Newton Cemetery, and you gave us some photos from Cold Spring Park. Are those two of the best places in Newton to go to see the tracks? We've got to go out and implement what you've told us. Where do we go?
Well, I'd start in your own backyard, especially if you've got some pavement there. So when you get a really skim coat of snow, go to the pavement. And then go to Cold Spring, the Newton Cemetery, and Webster Woods.
Okay.
Those are the three easiest places. To get really clear tracks, you want pavement or ice with a very thin coat of snow. And that's why I favor the cemetery to get some of those really good tracks. But if you've got deep snow, I've got great bird all the bird pictures I showed, with the exception of the one in the cemetery, were from Webster Woods, where the birds will come down and they'll walk all around the place. And lots of mice and birds in Cold Spring Park, too. So
Okay, all those roads in the cemetery.
that's, and all those lazy animals.
Okay. Terrific. Well, thank you, Barbara. This was amazing. And thank you, everyone. If you have more questions for Barbara, and we'll send this out in our notice, it'll go out tomorrow. You can submit them to her at info@newtonconservators.org, or you can submit them to webinars@newtonconservators.org, and we will get that information to you. And thank you, everyone. Have a really good rest of the winter. Bye.